Okay, welcome back to the Comfort Zone series. I have a very special guest today, someone who I actually know fairly well, Scott Sonenshein, who is the author of the forthcoming book, Stretch. Unlock the power of less and achieve more than you ever imagined. Scott is a professor at Rice University. This seems like an awesome book. And although he might talk a little bit about the book, during our discussion, he will talk about the experience of acting outside his comfort zone, which I suspect might be related to the book.
Well, thanks for having me, Andy.
Yeah. So tell us, can you give us a situation outside your comfort zone that you can share with the audience, and just talk about what the situation was, why it's been outside your comfort zone, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the book Stretch, Andy, and one of the things that really pushed me outside my comfort zone was one, deciding to write the book, and then two, all of the work that I've been doing trying to get the word out about Stretch. As an academic, we tend to sometimes live in very insular worlds and have conversations with the same people in the same communities. And one of my objectives in trying to write a popular book geared for a general audience was to try and have conversations with a lot more people and a different type of people, which, as you can imagine, for an introvert like myself, was not the easiest thing to do. So I've been trying to reach outside of my comfort zone by one, having this project and this book that's very different than what I've typically done, and two, trying to interact with a bunch of people and spread the ideas in the book.
So it sounds like there's the decision point, and then there's the sort of spreading the word point. Let's go back to the decision point. We'll start there. And I actually remember discussing this with you. We were talking earlier. We took a little walk to discuss, because we were both writing books around the same time now. So tell me about the decision for you. What were the, if you have the angel and the devil on your shoulders, or the good and the bad, or the plus and minus, what were the fears that you had, way back when, that were maybe pushing you not to do it, despite the fact that you did?
Yeah, no, of course. And I mean, I had a lot of fears because, the idea of writing the book, I spent 2 years kind of mulling over whether or not I wanted to do this or not. And there were some definite fears that were going through my mind. And, probably the biggest were, well, one, what would my colleagues think that I decided to spend time, instead of doing more traditional academic research, to take a break, basically, and write this book. And that was probably my biggest fear is, am I letting people down? What are they going to think of me, because this is so different from what I've actually done? And then two was, I knew if I was going to write a popular book, I knew a part of that was going to be engaging with a different type of audience and different people than I was used to having to talk about. So I knew at some point, and that point is beginning to come up very soon, is I'll have to kind of escape my shell and get out there and try and engage with people. And on one hand, that's a very exciting thing, but on the other hand, it's also terrifying.
It's funny. I think it's a universal thing. It's because here's an intersection point between. And I want to hear about your book too, but there's an intersection point between my book and what you're talking about. So my book's about reaching outside your comfort zone, and I can't tell you how many people I have interviewed or even worked with here who have had the same, not who have written books, but who are introverted and have struggled to stretch outside their comfort zone to meet people, networking events, building their careers, and so on. So what? I mean, I know you're kind of on the cusp of it, but anything seem to work for you, or have you been experimenting with different ways to grapple with that?
Yeah, I think part of it is just doing it and just trying to enact yourself and not getting caught up in those fears and seeing yourself acting in ways and then making the attribution that says, well, wait, I can actually do this. So instead of worrying about what you can't do, just start doing things and get the wheels moving. So I try not to ruminate about it too much and just try and put myself in situations where I don't really have a choice. And writing the book was, I'm not going to have a choice. I will be engaging with people, and that's my coping mechanism, I guess, is to just force the situation and force me into these circumstances that compel me to kind of reach outside of my comfort zone. I mean,
So
a lot of people.
yeah. Go ahead,
Go ahead.
continue. Yeah, yeah.
I was gonna say a lot of people think of academics or even myself when when I'm speaking. I can easily speak in front of 500 people and it's not a problem. But the part the more anxiety I would have over the book, of course, is having just a one-on-one conversation when someone says a stranger comes up and says, "Tell me about your book."
Right. The
That's
elevator pitch.
Yeah, the elevator pitch. I mean, I've always worried about the elevator pitch ever since I was in graduate school. Was what's your research about? Well,
Right.
that's
Well,
a hard question actually for me to answer sometimes. So there's this sense that as people who talk a lot in public and who can speak in front of hundreds of people without much of a problem, that we must be extroverts.
yeah.
But not all. I think many of us actually aren't. And writing the book is forcing me to not necessarily change from being an introvert, but put me in situations that I've historically tried to avoid.
So is that why the actual decision was such a big deal that you sort of mulled over for a couple of years because you knew how how essentially that decision was going to lead to a series of cascading challenges? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, that wasn't the main obstacle. That was always something in the back of my mind, and I knew that once I decided to write a book, that would be something I'd have to deal with,
Yeah.
and I wanted to deal with it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of nice to expand your skills in the situation that you're in. But the bigger hang up about the book was more of just the sense of am I disappointing people by doing things that are not traditional that I shouldn't actually be doing? And I think once I got over that, the rest of it was a lot easier to deal with.
It's funny because I'll bet people watching this might not know that writing a I imagine your book is it hasn't come out yet. I haven't read it, but I'm sure it's a very smart, book, and it's fun. People watching this might be wondering why would colleagues, not feel that it's appropriate for you to write a smart book based on your research to communicate your ideas to people who might actually benefit from them. Can you
Yeah,
say a
well,
word about that?
it's a bizarre world that we live in sometimes in universities. But in hindsight, I mean, that was just such a ridiculous question. I felt I was asking at the time, and I'm really sorry that it took me a couple of years to come around to actually doing it, because it's been quite the opposite, and I've learned that people are actually really supportive of these types of projects, and that's really affirming. Not only helps and embolden me to continue to try and reach outside my comfort zone, knowing that I have such great support from people,
Yeah.
especially when I wasn't necessarily expecting it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You said something earlier. I just want to come back to. I guess the term, I might be wrong, from academics, do we call it the looking glass self? That you sort of act, see how you act, observe yourself, and then infer that that's who I am in some
Right.
ways? Yeah. So that's interesting. It's sort of an interesting tactic for stepping outside your comfort zone. It's kind of like the psychological logic behind the just do it in some ways, right? You just do it, you see that you do it, and then you sort of come to a new realization about yourself. But how do you take that leap? I mean, that's the, like when you're presented with an opportunity to, let's say you're in a room and there, that there's some people over in the corner that you could talk to about your book, like in these sort of uncomfortable one-on-one conversations. And on the right are people who you know very well and don't have to talk to your book. What will make you go left?
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Metaphorically,
Yeah, and I think what makes me go left, and I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about it, because I have one of my chapters in Stretch really tries to talk about this just doing it mentality. Is you just sometimes have to jump in, and we tend to think that we want to plan our best performances and spend a lot of time and a lot of effort scripting out things, coming up with something clever to say. When I go left, I'm going to think about, what are the few sentences I'm going to tell people about my book. But for me, what I found that actually works is to go left, but not to think about going left. Just, kind of take the steps, start heading left, and see where things take me. Not plan what I'm going to say, because then you become really self-conscious. Did I deliver my performance the right way? Is this really the best plan? When you don't have a plan and you just start enacting things, you're able to kind of learn on the fly and not be worried and anxious about whether or not you're executing on that plan.
And what's the role of anxiety there? Is that sort of implying that there's a mid-range level of anxiety that you can take action despite that, or would you even say that this could work if your anxiety is super high?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know where the cutoff is, but for me, I wouldn't say it's super high anxiety, but there's I think
Moderate.
always a little anxiety, and I feel like the best way for me at least to handle that is to just work through it and not worry
Yeah.
about planning the performance and just kind of put myself in the situations. And I think over time I'm becoming more comfortable with this because it's something that I'm seeing myself do. So therefore, I must be able to do it.
Hence the looking glass up.
Yes.
Are there any situations that you or just in general, if you're starting to think about it, where you would actually say, no, you know what, I think I'm going to stay right in my comfort zone? Like, is this a mantra we want people to adopt about everything, or are there limits to it and boundaries? Is it personal? Are there any universal rules? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah. Well, it seems like it would be exhausting if you're always stepping outside your comfort zone. And there are times where the familiar is a good place to be in.
Yeah.
At the same time, you don't want to get stale and static, and you want to be able to, stretch who you are as a person, develop skills, develop new relationships, and it's hard to do that when you're staying in one place. So I think there's a balance that you need to find, and where that balance is probably going to differ.
Yeah, like a portfolio of some. It's like a risk portfolio. Like you'll take some situations that are riskier, and then but you need this. You'd probably go crazy if your entire portfolio was, in the risk side or something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
no, that's
Interesting. Okay, so any last pieces of actually no. Before we get to last piece of advice, say a word about your book. So I mean, there's an audience of people listening to this video. Tell us a little. I guess I'm now putting you in this
exactly.
situation.
Thank you for helping me step outside. I knew there was a catch here, Andy.
Right. All right.
Yeah, yeah, but
If you're able to jump in, tell us
yeah,
about the book.
absolutely. I'll jump in, Andy. Thank you. Stretch is a book that really fights this mentality that you think you need more resources to do more. It's a way of taking whatever resources you have, whether it be money, time, information, relationship, and expanding the value of those resources. It's about being active and engaged with what you have and not being anxious and stressed out about what you don't have.
Mm,
Um, and it looks at both resourceful organizations that are able to stretch whatever they have, whether they're small entrepreneurial startups or large organizations that have found a way to foster a culture of resourcefulness, or individuals, whether they're starting their careers or they're seasoned executives. How do they build a more successful career and meaningful life by focusing inward on what's already around as opposed to trying to chase after what other people have or what they think they need?
really interesting. All right. I could use that. So I'll definitely check it out. So any other thoughts, final thoughts about, you know, comfort zones from your own experience in this situation, whether it's the deciding stage, whether it's the now executing stage, or anything you've learned from your book writing? Any final sort of musings on comfort zones?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have a thirst to be able to grow. So what I really like what you're doing is you're encouraging people and giving them a guide about how to uh, step out of the familiar and do something a bit differently. And I think that's an important foundation to being able to grow as a person. So thank you for giving us that gift.
You're welcome. All right, great. This is really helpful and interesting. I appreciate your being with us today, with me today, but us, the general audience, and real great success with your book.
Thanks, Andy. Good luck
Okay.
too.